I liken being African American to being biracial, where you don't necessarily know exactly where you fit in regards, you don't know if you fit in with white culture or if you fit in with black culture.
It's not a bad perspective.
So when it comes to being a Moor.
Yes, Moorish American.
Yes, Moorish American. Are we necessarily, it's a twofold question. So are we necessarily appropriating our culture per se from the Moor side? And the second question is in regards to the American side of us, are we assimilating? So
okay, all right, excellent question. All right, it's a multi-tiered question. I see. That's what I like to do. Let me go to Act 6 of the Divine Constitution and Bylaws. The very last sentence states, says that the Moorish Americans are the descendants of the ancient Moabites whom inhabited the northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa. Right? They used the term ancient Moabites. Right? Now we're clear that the term Moroccan, is merely the modern term for Moabite. Right? Same people. Right? When we say Moabite, it's the ancient or the original stock of Moabites. Right? Now, we wouldn't be appropriating because appropriating would be more so taken without permission. Right? The prophet instructed us to proclaim. Right? See, when you proclaim your nationality, right? He said anytime you get the pen in your, see, you can't force anybody to write your name. Right? But when you get the pen in your hand, you write your name. Right? So you have to set the record straight as to what you are. Right? Now, the Moroccan Empire, the Moorish Empire, was an empire, right? It wasn't just a nation, right? So as Brother Raphael demonstrated earlier this week, that empires are, inclusive of multiple nations, right? Clans, tribes, etc., right? So you might have had people that, politically proclaim, talking about forefathers, ancient, proclaimed as Moorish because of the protections of the Moorish Empire, because if you were a subject of the Moorish Empire, you were protected. Anywhere you went as a Moor, right, and you were acknowledged as such, it was hands off. Because if you lay hands on that Moor, you got to deal with the Sultan and his army or his navy. Islam. So, but you have to proclaim that. If you don't proclaim it, right, what would be disingenuous would be to claim something that you don't have a direct lineage to. I'm Kemet. Now people claim Kemet, right? Okay, prove it in the sense of contemporary history. Prove your connection to Kemet within the past 200 years. There is none. I can show you a direct link between you and your people to the Moors on this soil, right? We can show you how this flag flew 10,000 years on this soil. You see what I'm saying? We can show you how Morocco, right, who we share a similar flag, right, wasn't able to fly this flag until 1956, when the Prophet brought it to us in 1913. Right? They couldn't fly it until 1956 because they had been invaded by the French. Right? They were under what's called a protectorate, right? Meaning that they could conduct business domestically, but internationally the French spoke on their behalf and controlled their commerce and stuff like that. Okay? So it wouldn't be cultural appropriation. Like right now they're talking about, Sheik Rashid put me up on something not too long ago. Again, Black Panther. The Jabari tribe worshipped a god. What was the god's name? Hunaman. Hunaman, who, for all intents and purposes, is an Indian god. So people are saying that this African nation, this fictional African nation, appropriated a god from India. Well, that's disingenuous because there's connections between nations in Africa and India. In fact, your Kushites and all them peopled India. It's the same people. You know that from the book I bought you. The African. What's the name of the book? Africans in Asia or something like that? Yes. Yeah. Right? So we've been interacting for a long time with those. So for them to put Hanuman, or this Indian deity, amongst this quote unquote African tribe, there's no strange happening. You see what I'm saying? It's a connection there. So it's not cultural appropriation. Right? But what it is that you have to control the narrative. Right? If we allow others to control the narrative, then they'll say we're worshiping in a foreign Muslim sense. You got to show them how the stock of Moroccans that are in Morocco today came by way of the Alawite dynasty in the 16th century and took control militarily, right? But they're not the true inhabitants of that land. They literally came from Arabia, okay? On the American side, American is not a word that started with the Europeans, okay? If you go back to the Iroquois Confederation, right? There were 6 nations of Native Americans that came together and decided to stop the wars amongst each other, right? And they formed a constitution for themselves known as the Law of the Great Peace, right? And under that, you know, they were demonstrating American nationality and citizenship. When the Europeans first started coming, William Penn was one of the first Europeans to sit amongst them, right? And study what it was to live under a republic. Because you gotta remember, under the 13 colonies, they came from England, which was a monarchy. So they didn't know anything about citizens' rights, stuff like that. All they knew was absolute power about the king, okay? And Britain was what is referred to as an absolute monarchy, meaning that whatever the king said went, period, right? If you didn't, you know, listen to the king, whatever, you could be beheaded in prison for life or whatever, all right? So when William Penn comes over, he was actually initiated into the Iroquois Confederacy and clothed with the title American. He was considered the first American, European American, you see? And they gave him protections and so on and so on, and started teaching him government, right? They gave him a holy name, right, which was Miquon, M-I-Q-U-O-N. And Miquon means quill, like a feathered quill that you write with, dip it in ink and write. Because he was the one that acted somewhat as a secretary for the European side amongst the Iroquois. So as they were talking and demonstrating government and stuff like that, he would jot down different things and go back to Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin and all of them and teach them about this new mode of government. While Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, all them were also going back and forth to the Sultan of Morocco learning government, while Thomas Jefferson has that Quran that he has in the Library of Congress, right? So they were being schooled on both sides of what it was to be an American, right? The ancient Moors, though also a monarchy, had the concept of a republic handed down to them from the ancient Egyptians. Because the ancient Egyptians, you can look at the Grand Lodge of Luxor in ancient Egypt as considered to be the Grand Lodge or the Grand Temple, right? And they had, you know, subordinate temples all over the earth, right? So they had one in Kush in Ethiopia, they had one in Rome, they had one in Greece, they had one in India, and so on and so forth. When they gathered together and came once a year for their annual convention, this all should sound familiar to Moors. When they, you know, gathered for their annual convention, they got together and, you know, they demonstrated a republic mode of government, where every person had a say-so, right? It wasn't just like a pharaoh who was considered God, said everything that everybody didn't know. Everybody was equal, you know what I'm saying, had a say-so as a citizen in that, you know, high mystery form of government, right? But you had to be initiated into that. That's not something they gave the common man because it wasn't the time yet, right? Everything is done according to the age, you know. At the head of every age, a master, you know, masters get together and decide what each nation needs. These are things that take place that people have no knowledge of. Right? So what is an age? An age is 2,160 years, right? They go through the 12 houses of the zodiac. Right? This gives you the number 25,920, which to our forefathers in their spiritual and their mystery systems, this would be considered 1 year. Right? We would call that the great year. Okay? After you've gone through, you know, 12 cycles of 2,160 years. Right? So masters would get together and be like, okay, this is the age where men need to see their God. So you notice back in those times there were statues everywhere. Right? When the age shifted, the Temple of Solomon, as it's said, was the first temple in the ancient world that had no images in it. Because the building of that was coming into another age when man was supposed to actualize his own God, or be your own God. That's the era we're coming into now, right? Actualizing your own divinity, teaching people how to think so they can save themselves. You understand what I'm saying? So, you know, that's so, you know, all of that to say, you know, the American side of what you're saying is a lot deeper than the European narrative. Again, you got to control the narrative. You see? So, you know, the Iroquois still exists. You can sit with them. You can talk, and they'll tell you the history. You know, I mention this all the time. There's a movie called Gangs of New York, right? Which shows you how all the European families in New York got their territories through war and bloodshed and all that type of stuff. But there was a hall known as Tammany Hall, Tammany, yes sir, right? So you seen Gangs of New York?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's on Netflix.
That's fine. Go back and watch it, and you'll see there's a scene with DiCaprio where he's in the hallway. There's two scenes actually. There's one, he's standing in front of a painting of Chief Tammany, right? And it makes no sense why they're holding, and it's a straight brother, he's about chuckle punch. The feathers the whole nine, right? He's just talking whatever, and there's another scene where he's standing in front of the statue of Chief Tammany, right? But Tammany Hall was set up by the Iroquois to teach ones who were coming over, the European immigrants, to teach them how to live in a republic. Same thing we're doing with Asiatics who don't know government. They can come in the Moorish Science Temple of America and learn government. You know, and you come in, we have Prophet Noble Draalia. You know, that's our Chief Tammany. You understand what I'm saying? You know, and amongst the Native American tribes, you must know too that they had prophets. You know what I'm saying? So prophet is not always filtered through a Judeo-Christian lens. See what I'm saying? Like there's one named Tenskwatawa. Tenskwatawa was the prophet in his era. Right? I think this is 1700s. His brother was Tecumseh. Tecumseh was the warrior, right? So he would prophesy to the people about what they needed to do, to stay away from the European ways, don't worship their customs, this and that, whatever. And when the Europeans, when they encroached territory, Tecumseh would organize and mobilize the people to wage war against the European nations. But this brother was considered a prophet. It was about 150 years, maybe 200 years before the prophet was dropped. On these shores. That was without a Bible, that was without a Quran, that was here already. You see what I'm saying? There's a European general by the name of Sherman, the one who burned Atlanta down during the Civil War. His middle name is Tecumseh. His mother named him after the Native American. Because she knew that he was such a great warrior, she wanted her son to have that energy. See? It's not the world that doesn't know what it is, it's we that don't know. You know, and because of our victimization, we think that us being ourselves is us being somebody else. That's not. The turban belongs to you. One thing you notice, the so-called slaves, how did so-called slaves dress?
Hair covered.
They look like North America. They look just like you and Sister Lamata, right? Why? Not because that was something that you think that's something the European gave them to wear, right? Because knowing what the European was doing, he wanted them with no clothes on, really, right? But Sister was like, nah, especially around this joke, I'm gonna cover it up. You see what I'm saying? I saw there's a picture circulating online. Google young Harriet Tubman. There's a young picture of Harriet Tubman. You wouldn't even recognize her, sister, how beautiful she was. They always show war-torn Harriet Tubman, you know, with the scars and the mean face. Now go back and look at what that sister was before she started running that underground railroad. Beautiful. Not saying that she wasn't beautiful later, but you know, it'll blow your mind when you see it, right? Yeah.